Making good boss fights is a difficult task, but especially for platformers. Naturally, games in this genre put a lot more emphasis on the environment than they do on fighting. Maybe your character will have a standard punch attack, but besides that, there isn't really an interesting way to engage foes in a lot of these titles. Most of these battles seem to be glorified auto-scroll stages. While still great fun at times, there is much more potential. So let's present the question. How do you make a good fight in a game where the fighting is super basic? The first Meat Boy's bosses were hardly bad, but too much of them felt as if they were just a standard level stretched out with a baddie chasing you. I'm not here to just knock chase scenes constantly. Crash and Donkey Kong Country both have their own amazing levels that involve elaborate chases, but it's certainly not the only way to do this kind of thing, and I'd like to see more games explore outside of them. Enter Super Meat Boy Forever. While far from perfect, Forever is a masterclass in how to do platforming bosses right, and I'll explain why. Forever's bosses are constant, gnawing threats that don't feel like disguised auto-scroll stages. Take Big Slugger, for example. He literally is the level. The design itself isn't inherently complex or anything, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that the player has to navigate around this stage in a complex way. It may just consist of two moving walls and a square, but it's set up such that it forces you to glide down the surfaces on the sides to attack these giant red buttons. The idea of only using enough pieces and mechanics that it's sophisticated enough to be fun, but simple enough on the surface, is a principle that can be beneficial when applied to not just boss fights, but many facets of game design. When the tools you have to access the game world around you are simple, but bring about interesting situations, you usually have something good on your hands. Why? Well, there's a time and place for nice sophisticated systems with multiple mechanics woven in and out of each other. It's not exactly user-friendly. It's more approachable for your game to have an immediate theme that's simple to understand but lasting enough to reveal its depth to you over time. In Splatoon's case, it's paint. Meat Boy's is less obvious. It's like, I don't know. F you, that's what that's what Meat Boy's theme is. It's just to reiterate on the idea of only using enough pieces and mechanics that it's complex enough to be fun, let's look at the two attacks you can do in Forever. As you already know, the punch and dive kicks do more than just attack enemies, they also let you cross a fair distance and increase your falling speed. In a more needlessly complex game, we would have had separate actions for dashing and increasing our fall distance. We would have just kept bloating the game with more and more mechanics, piling on top of each other, confusing the player needlessly, when you really could have just solved two problems at once. You don't even need an overtly long and intricate stage either, or tons of fighting moves, though I do like those. Look at the third boss, for instance. The environment is really simple. Two vertical treadmills, and some pits. But the player is constantly making these split-second decisions on whether or not they want to go under or over the boss, depending on the situation the lasers are going, and when to slow down or increase their speed while avoiding these snail things. It provides the bare minimum environmental tools needed to give unique and interesting choices to the player that they have to adapt to on the fly. Meat Boy doesn't need a giant list of different attacks and parries. It's all in the design instead of the character. And the fact that you can't stop running makes it even more impressive than pulling off a good boss fight in a standard platformer. Maybe the already confirmed Meat Boy 3 will have other interesting opportunities for boss battles. These important commandments regarding level design and game design probably became a lot more relevant to all of you after you exited the 50th bad Mario Maker level on your Nintendo Switch. Now contrast Forever with something like Nioh, where the environment itself is not as fundamental to the core game. Most of the variety, mechanics, and progression is inward, character-based. That's not to say that it's easy to make a boss fight as long as it's not a platformer, but it's definitely not as hard when the game is already focused around combat. There are of course games that successfully marry both. Whilst it's certainly not a platformer, Monster Hunter World made great strides in getting the design of the level itself involved in the combat. I've avoided using the phrase simple to learn but hard to master so far in this video because I don't work for IGN, but it does carry a lot of truth with it. Forever keeps its fights simple, in all of the right ways, and I'm sure a lot of game journalists will take pride in saying every time you die it's your fault. To circle back around to our question from the beginning, how do you make a good fight in a platformer? Well, the answer might sound broad, but kind of the same way you make any level in a platformer good. Provide an interesting mechanic that keeps your stage entertaining for its duration, only this time under the theme of an ever-present enemy. I can't count on my fingers how many things I believe the first Meat Boy does better than Forever, but the boss battles are definitely not one of them. Platformers of all shapes, strides, and sizes should be taking note. That way bosses are a thing to look forward to, instead of an annoying roadblock in an otherwise great game. Though it's not a platformer, one game that has really interesting boss fights, including Super Meat Boy himself, is Desktop Dungeons. Not only do you have to manage your health potions during these fights, but you have to purposely spare lower level enemies so that you can level up mid-battle. Here's a video I did covering it. It's a cliche thing to say, but please do like and subscribe to the video if you enjoyed it. It really does help smaller channels like myself get a foothold in the YouTube algorithm. Bye-bye.